welcome to the Summarise Press TV's weekly show on Palestine. I'm Roshan Mohammed Salih. Palestinians in Gaza have suffered for over a decade under a crippling economic blockade. Unemployment in the besieged territory stands at 45%, while two-thirds of the population depends on humanitarian aid. There's virtually no industry in Gaza, with factories and key sectors such as construction forced to close down due to restrictions on the entry and exit of goods and materials. Gaza has seen conditions steadily deteriorate since the blockade was imposed by Israel and Egypt after Hamas was democratically elected in 2006. Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas has also stepped up pressure on Hamas by cutting the salaries of civil servants and limiting electricity deliveries. Here's Ashraf Shannon in Gaza with an update on the situation there.
Palestinians in the Gaza Strip have been denied their basic rights since 2007. Israel's land, air and sea blockade of the tiny coastal sliver is in contravention of international law and amounts to collective punishment. It also severely restricts imports and exports and access to agricultural land and fishing areas. In late March, people in Gaza started mass peaceful rallies to demand the right of return for Palestinian refugees and the complete lifting of the Israeli blockade. During the course of their peaceful action, Israeli forces killed over 200 protesters and injured thousands.
We want this brutal blockade to end, and we have been suffering for several years because of it. We also never give up any part of our land. Our blood is not cheap, but also freedom doesn't come cheap.
The prolonged closure of Gaza's sole commercial crossing has negatively impacted trade and helped increase unemployment and poverty, while 70% of young Gazans are without work.
We will continue our peaceful rallies until the blockade is fully lifted and the right of return for Palestinian refugees is achieved. The Israeli soldiers can kill and injure us, but we will end this illegal blockade of Gaza. I don't have electricity and I don't work, and I will continue to demonstrate.
The tight Israeli blockade prevents sustainable growth and perpetuates high levels of food insecurity and aid dependency.
The world must come out of its silence and pressure Israel into lifting the blockade. Palestinians in Gaza are demanding an end to these inhumane measures and collective punishment. This blockade amounts to a war crime, and 2 million people in Gaza have been suffering for a long time. The Gaza Strip needs freedom of movement for people and goods, as well as free trade without interference by the Israeli occupation.
Earlier this year, the United Nations warned that the Gaza Strip is on the verge of total collapse.
For over a decade, Palestinians in Gaza have been unable to provide for their families, and the quality of vital services has rapidly deteriorated. Ashraf Shannon, The Sun Will Rise, Gaza.
To discuss the situation in Gaza, we have two guests in the studio with us today. Khalid Walid is a British Palestinian activist who was born in Gaza. Khalid specialises in Palestinian prisoner rights and is a strong advocate for the need for a strong Palestinian lobby here in the UK. And Jafar Amini is a Palestinian writer and political analyst living in London. He was born in Jenin but was educated in England and spent the early years of his working life in the Persian Gulf countries. Jafar and Khalid, welcome. Khalid, I'm going to come to you first because you're from Gaza. We hear about the terrible situation there. Constantly we're talking about it. What are your friends and family in Gaza saying to you about the situation in Gaza now?
I mean, based on the report here, we now understand that the situation hasn't improved this week, last week, for so many years. For almost 12 years, Gaza has been under siege. Unfortunately, this siege will probably continue for as long as it takes, because there wasn't any enough steps by the international community and by the countries around Palestine, Gaza, to lift the siege and allow Palestinians to live under freedom of movement, freedom of seeking basic needs. And what we see lately is UNRWA is the only Palestinian refugee agency that's been supporting Palestinians educationally and health-wise, including myself. When I was a young boy in Gaza, I did receive those services. Now those services are in fear of being cut completely.
Yeah, the US kind of cut funding to UNRWA, didn't they? Has that had any immediate effect in the last couple of months?
Yes, I mean, in my own family, I think 6 members of my own family were told that they can't carry on working for the UNRWA. Some of them were teachers, some of them were health professionals. My mother as well works for the UNRWA. So it does affect not only for people who are working for UNRWA, but here we're talking about the wider Palestinian
So you have
society.
highly educated people in Gaza that can't find jobs, and young people especially, there's no hope for them.
Of course, I mean, almost 68% or so Palestinian youth unemployment. That's a huge number. And yes, of course, I think what Israel had started the siege back in 2007 didn't achieve any of that. So I think we need to have an immediate relief to the people there.
And before I come to Jaffa, you said that this siege will continue until it achieves what it set out to achieve. You're talking about the collapse of Hamas, or what are you talking about?
We're probably talking about the collapse of the Palestinian societies, wherever they are. Gaza was a symbolic place for resistance and for opposing Israeli oppression. And here, if you remember, all the intifadas that happened, they started from Gaza. And therefore, Israel wanted this strip to be stripped off and completely die away. So it is dangerous for Palestinians to live under this siege for so long now.
Jaffa, what do you make of the situation in Gaza at the moment?
Well, it's dire, as Khalid just described. I went to Gaza in 1999, the first time, to see the late Yasser Arafat, with the view of helping the fledgling country on its feet. And unfortunately, we all know what happened since then. The PA is a disgrace. I need to correct Khalid on one little thing here. The first intifada did not happen from Gaza. It happened from a village in the north, in the south of Palestine called Der Sahur. And it continued from there. In those days, Hamas wasn't even in existence. But I would like to take you and your viewers back a little bit to show the background to this tragedy. In 2004, an Israeli scholar by the name of Aaron Sofa, he is a geographer and demographer at the University of Haifa, advised the then Prime Minister Sharon to withdraw from Gaza and change it into a cage. And then he said to him, and when the 2 million in that cage become animals and come to the fence, we kill and kill and kill day in and day out until we finish them. This is number one. This has happened. I was on a panel not dissimilar to this at the London University a few years back, when a young chap like Khalid was doing his master's degree in journalist here, came as a last-minute replacement. And when he saw me sitting there, he looked at me and he said, "What can I say with Father Palestine sitting there? But I'm going to say one thing. What Israel did to us, they put us in a cage, they locked it and threw the key into the sea."
Okay, gentlemen, we're going to continue this discussion in a few minutes' time, but we are going to move on now. Palestinian societies at British universities have been under severe pressure from the authorities to dampen down their views. This pressure could be about the speakers they invite to address students or the content of their rhetoric about Israel. Our reporter Ahmed Kabbalah went along to the University of Westminster's first Palestine event of the academic year. Here's his reports.
Here at the University of Westminster, there have been many events highlighting the Palestinian plight. But over the years, there's been many obstacles trying to shut down society and stop events. Nonetheless, the society remains steadfast and continues to promote the Palestinian cause. As the new university semester gets going and new students begin to engage with the Palestinian cause, the organisers of pro-Palestine events and pro-Palestinian activists face some great challenges.
University campuses have to be free from all these restrictions. Students who come to university, they need to be able to take part in activism.
Last year, the pro-Israel lobby was already cancelling events and speakers, and they even tried to shut down Israeli Apartheid Week, a series of events on campuses highlighting Israel's apartheid policies that discriminate against Palestinians and those wanting to return home. However, many feel that those challenges are even greater now with the emergence of a new controversial International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism being accepted by the Labour Party and normalised by the mainstream British press. The definition gives examples of anti-Semitism, which critics argue conflates criticism of Israel with anti-Semitism. It cites referring to the creation of Israel, where 700,000 Palestinians were ethnically cleansed from their land as a racist endeavour, as an example of anti-Semitism. Some worry that this new controversial definition will deter new students from engaging with the Palestinian cause for fear of being branded an anti-Semite. These were some of the obstacles that the organisers had to take into consideration when organising an event on the history of Palestine for freshers at the University of Westminster.
The obstacles have been endless in regarding what's happened to our society, and they change the rooms last minute, they cancel our events last minute without any real reason. They try to attack students personally. I've had disciplinary action faced against me to intimidate me from pursuing any more activism regarding Palestine at university. But all these obstacles that we face just encourage us further in what we're doing.
The speaker spoke about these challenges and how students looking to engage with Palestine need to be prepared for attacks and smears from the Israel lobby, and more importantly, what skills they will need to defend themselves and lobby on behalf of Palestine. Ultimately, the speakers in the attendance were in defiant mood and felt that they were ready for the challenges ahead because it was a cause worth fighting.
Don't be afraid, because a lot of people are afraid to join these things because they think that they'll be targeted by the government or there's a lot of conspiracy going on. Don't be afraid. It's actually you're just giving a voice to the voiceless people in Gaza and in Palestine. Nothing will happen to you as long as you respect the law.
However, the university semester has just started, and only time will tell what effects the smears by the Israel lobby has had on student activism.
Before we continue our discussion about Gaza, Khalid, I do want to ask you about the report that we just saw, because you were a student activist in your day. Do you think that freedom of speech on Palestine is under threat in British universities?
I mean, as an elected sabbatical officer, I was elected as a sabbatical officer at the University of Bradford. That was back in 2009. I think since even 2009 till today, I have seen more restrictions by UK universities and the government too on activists, on activists for Palestine. And for me, I feel this needs to be stopped. This needs to be addressed by politicians and by activists themselves. It has been so difficult in the recent years for activists for Palestine to be able to even organize a simple event like the one that we saw here.
But the same pressure doesn't exist on pro-Israeli societies, for example, does
no,
it?
we don't seem to see that. No.
Yes. Let's get back to our discussion on Gaza, gentlemen. We're seeing these March of Return protests happen with less publicity nowadays. Yeah. Every week, it's still ongoing. Palestinians are still mowed down every week with far less publicity than before. But Khalid, what strikes me is after 12 years of siege and war, death and destruction, they're not defeated, are they? The people of Gaza are not defeated.
The people are very determined to show the world how severe the siege is on the people there. They had no mean but to go for these events and for taking part in these rallies and demonstrations.
No matter what the cost.
No matter what the cost. And yeah, we feel sorry as an international community not to do much to them. And obviously we do understand the reasons. The countries around Gaza, including Egypt, and the situation between the two major political parties in Palestine are not doing so great and not doing so good to the Palestinians.
There was a lot of politicking at the end of last year, the Fatah-Hamas reconciliation agreement, all designed to relieve the pressure on the people of Gaza. Is the situation better than it was a year ago? It doesn't seem to be, does it?
I think we all understand the situation currently. I don't think talking about it would actually help. Palestinians back in 2006 went for a clear democratic choice. Yeah. They've elected one specific political party. The other political party had more support by Israel and the Americans and the West. I think what we need to do simply is to go back, sure, to allow Palestinians to take their democratic choice once again, because that's probably the only way forward.
Jafar, I must challenge you to a certain extent, because before the report you did say that the Palestinians faced three enemies, and we all know that politically the Palestinians are split and some people aren't fans of the PA or Hamas. Mm-hmm. But you did say that they had to challenge their internal rulers. Is that a good idea when they're under siege? Isn't that what Israel wants them to do?
No, what I mean challenge is I don't mean civil war. I mean they should not sit still and do nothing about it. What is happening in the border, the fence in Gaza for the last 3 months shows and answers your question about us Palestinians. We don't do defeat. But what's happening is murder, and murder en masse. And if I may quote again another Israeli MK by the name of Avi Dichter, who said only last week, Israel has a bullet for each man, woman, and child in Gaza. And they've all killed, no problem. Another one before him in 1914 when Israel attacked Gaza and killed over 2,000 people. The then Speaker of the House, Moshe Eglin, said, our main concern is our soldiers. Every hair on an Israeli soldier is worth the entire population of Gaza.
You know, the defense minister, Israel's defense minister or minister of military affairs, Avigdor Lieberman, has said that Gaza needs to be dealt another blow.
Yes,
just this week he said that.
And look, they don't need to flex their muscles. Gaza is defenseless. What I have against the two main powers, Fatah and Hamas, is the division allows Israel to play this game. And the Arab countries, especially those in the Gulf, the rich ones, don't help. Saudi Arabia is supporting Fatah. Qatar and Turkey are supporting Hamas. Who is supporting the Palestinian people? Who is supporting the Palestinian cause?
So you want to see an end to the factionalism?
Exactly. Who is
From
supporting our
outside.
people who are starving to death in Gaza?
Okay, we're going to conclude this discussion in a few minutes' time, but we are going to move on. And actually, we're going to catch up with a few recent stories about Palestine that I'm sure you didn't see on the mainstream media. The only crossing point between Syria and the Israeli-occupied Golan Heights has reopened for United Nations observers 4 years after closing due to the war in Syria. The UN force returned to the area after Syrian government forces backed by Russia succeeded in recapturing territory near the Golan Heights and driving out armed militant groups from a de-escalation zone. 2 UN jeeps crossed into the Golan Heights on Monday near the Syrian border town of Quneitra after a deal between Israel and the UN, which was accepted by Syria. The UN observers were deployed at the Quneitra crossing from 1974 to 2014 to monitor a ceasefire and a demilitarized zone. Israel illegally occupied the Golan Heights in 1967 and unilaterally annexed it in 1981. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has threatened to inflict very strong blows on Hamas after fresh violence along the fence that separates the besieged Gaza Strip from historic Palestine. Israeli forces killed 7 protesters along the fence last Friday during the ongoing weekly Great March of Return protests, which began in March. Though largely peaceful, a small group of protesters displayed their frustration at the Israeli occupation by flying incendiary balloons and kites that floated over Israel's separation fence, and they set fire to agricultural land.
The
message did not sink in with Hamas. If they don't stop the violent attacks against us, they'll be stopped in another way, and it'll be painful, very painful.
And finally, Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison, whose government faces a crucial election in 4 days, said on Tuesday that Canberra was open to recognising Jerusalem Al-Quds as the capital of Israel, prompting concern from Palestinian officials. Morrison's comments about recognising Al-Quds and moving Australia's embassy there, just like US President Donald Trump's controversial decision last December, would reverse decades of Australian foreign policy and inflame tensions with some of Australia's Asian neighbours, especially Muslim Indonesia and Malaysia. Palestinian Foreign Minister Riyad al-Maliki has condemned the move. Jafar, I must ask you about the Australian story, because I know that you live in Australia half the year.
I do.
Yes, what do you make of this seemingly very kind of hawkish move from the Australian authorities?
Well, the Liberal Party, which is in power at the moment, are a right-wing racist party. And when Turnbull resigned last summer, and then he left his seat vacant in a place called Wentworth. I knew something will happen when Sharma was put to the fore as the preferred candidate. Now Sharma is a Zionist, and he served as Australia's ambassador to Israel. So what better credential do you need? And to reaffirm those credentials, he was convincing the hierarchy of the Liberal Party to take this move. The move started under his predecessor when Mrs. Bishop, the foreign minister, invited a war criminal like Netanyahu to come to Australia, and he was treated like a hero. So Australia is no surprise to me. And for my sins, as you just said, I am a resident of Australia, and it cost me a fortune.
Okay, let's conclude our discussion on Gaza now, gentlemen. Khalid, what's going to happen in the future? Obviously, there's a lot of speculation in the Israeli media, also the Palestine media, that there will be another war, another round of fighting between Hamas and Israel. Is that going to happen?
I mean, looking at the analysis for the past recent few weeks, in terms of what's been happening in Palestine, I think this seemed to be more of a calming down the situation. But my view over what's been happening currently is that we have to slightly take away the media and take away the what's been happening in Gaza to the international community. We remember back in 2014 where there was a series of Palestine state recognition across European countries. I think they helped to bring the question of Palestine to the forefront of politics here in Europe. And what we have seen in the last Labour Party conference, that there has been a shift towards supporting Palestinian rights. So I think we take part in the international community here to lobby on what's been happening. I think we have to we have to reflect on Israeli aggression against Palestinians, to hold European politicians to account, and government. So we will support Jeremy Corbyn because he will be able to achieve Palestinian recognition, but also Palestinian rights on the spot.
Okay, Jaffa, we only have about a minute and a half left, I'm afraid, but I'll give the final word to you. How do you see the future of Gaza?
Very dire. There is no goodwill on behalf of the international community, and now the likes of Mr. Trump are on the helm. We are in trouble, not only in Gaza, in the West Bank, in the entire Middle East. And my fear is, I would hate to see our cause that has lasted for 100 years and cost us tens of thousands of martyrs be turned into a humanitarian crisis. This is a political situation. This is about land theft, theft of resources, and ethnic cleansing. We do not want to be fed if we are slaves. We'd rather die and not live as slaves.
Okay, gentlemen, thank you very much for coming in today and for your words of wisdom. Thank you very much, Khalid and Jaffa.
Thank you.
That is all the time we have today, I'm afraid. Thank you for joining us, and please do continue to follow the show, please, on social media. We'll be back next week, of course, with more news and analysis on the Palestinian freedom struggle. Bye-bye.